It is week 40 here on Technado, and we've got an exciting episode for you. We have our intrepid field reporters right here in studio with me, going to be covering Microsoft Ignite 2018, all the exciting announcements that came out of there summarized in one nice little podcast starting now. All right, everybody, welcome back to Technado. This week we are going into a slightly different format than normal because we're doing our Microsoft Ignite 2018 Roundup episode. I have Mr. Mike Roderick and Ms. Cherokee here with me in the studio, both of which were on the scene at Microsoft Ignite in Orlando, Florida this year. This guy sat right here in my office during the whole thing, so I have no idea what happened except what I saw in the news. We're going to get a first-hand accounting right here from these two about what occurred, what they saw, what they thought was cool. Before I do that, I know both of you have been on the podcast at one point or another, but for our viewers who aren't familiar with you, let's just do a quick introduction. Mike, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm Mike. I've been working here at ITProTV for several years, and I teach primarily the Microsoft certification tracks, the MCSA, the MCSE, and the client side as well. So that's really my primary focus. Then I dabble in a lot of scripting. Love me some PowerShell. Love to work with that, but primarily Active Directory, group policy, DNS, DHCP, those kind of things.
Awesome. And Miss Cherokee?
Yeah, so I am also an edutainer here for ITProTV, and I also love Microsoft and a little bit of project management and all things Microsoft. Trying to absorb it all, yes.
All right, well,
the Kool-Aid.
I did.
Microsoft Ignite is a big deal, right? It used to be 4 different conferences. They rolled it all together a few years ago, and now you go one place and you get just overwhelmed with information. That's why we sent both of you. Do you feel like you got to see everything you wanted to see?
Absolutely not.
Not at all.
No, not even close. I mean, it was huge. It was at the the Orange County Convention Center down in Orlando, which if you've never been to this, it's one of the biggest convention centers I've ever been to.
Massive.
And it is just huge. And they took up the whole place. It wasn't like they had part of it. They took up the whole place, the West Wing, the North Wing, the South Wing.
They even spilled over into the Hyatt across the street and took advantage of their ballrooms and spaces there.
Crazy. And some of the theaters, like the Chaplin Theater, I remember, I mean, it could hold over 1,500 people, and these would be full. There were people standing outside wishing they could get in. Wow. And if somebody got up and left early, they would allow a few more people in. So it was a packed house. It was a lot of fun, though. A lot of great vendors, a lot of really good demonstrations and talks by the people from Microsoft, right, and the higher up people. So it's a really neat time.
Now, I know the demonstrations, the hands-on stuff, you can only do that at the conference, but the presentations that go on, all the various talks, a lot of that gets recorded, and they throw that online, right?
So
you guys know?
It is online currently on demand. If you were a registrant or an attendee of the conference, I feel like it will trickle onto YouTube. I don't know when. I don't think it has yet.
Yeah, I don't know if you can still register or sign into it. Like I know when you go to My Ignite, you can log in with Facebook account or your account uses registration, and you can get access to those. And the majority of them, I have seen a few that didn't make it yet, a couple where the videos had problems and they haven't been able to upload them yet. But from what I understand, they're working on that. So it's a great way to go back and watch and get access to the slide deck as well.
All right. Well, for all our viewers out there that don't have access, that didn't make it out to the conference, right? Let's do them a service and kind of cut to the meat and potatoes of this. Talk about some of the favorite things that you guys encountered. Who wants to go first?
Ladies first?
Oh, sure. I have a feeling that our lists may be similar because when we started just talking about the different sessions we attended, a lot of them were similar. But there were so many people, you could even see who was in there. One of my favorite sessions was with Jeffrey Snover and Jason Helmick.
That was great.
I think that was his last name. Yeah, it was a pretty awesome session, and they were introducing just a lot of advancements that have been made in PowerShell and Cloud Shell and just running the different commandlets on both our Windows and Linux systems, and I just really couldn't believe it. And to see even someone like Jeffrey Snover kind of fumble through something, it was really cool and inspiring to see how down to earth he was. He said something like, PowerShell is such a great tool because it can even work for individuals as deeply flawed as myself. And I just thought that was really cool for him to be, just a real person.
I would definitely concur with that. I set that session as well. And here at ITProTV, we talk about edutainers and how we try to lighten it up a little bit and not just be a very droll lecture and voice over PowerPoint. And I tell you what, those two guys defined edutainment, because they had the audience rolling, but at the same time, you were learning a lot. He was really focused on, and if you don't know where, this is Jeffrey Snover. He's the one that invented PowerShell or came up with this. And he was focused on PowerShell core, because that's where we're going, and the ability to do cross-platform management. And one of the things that just floored me was when he ran a command to retrieve services that were running on a server. But the target of this command, one was a Windows server, one was a Linux server. So with one command, he was able to query both servers, retrieve those services, and combine the results, group them, sort them, as if they all came from the same platform. And to me, that shows you that the power, no pun intended, of PowerShell and where PowerShell is going is the ability, because they know, and he said it on stage. We're not the only one. We know that in Azure, I think they finally made the tipping point. There's more Linux servers up there than there are Microsoft servers. So as an admin, we're not just managing Windows devices, right? We need a tool that'll allow us to do both, and that's what PowerShell Core does, and they did a great job of showing off that capability.
I was surprised about the amount of Linux news that came out of Microsoft Ignite, because it is not normally like that. We heard that 51% of virtual machines in Azure now are running Linux. We heard about PowerShell Core being able to run on Linux and Mac OS, which is a Unix-like operating system under the hood. We started hearing about other tools that were going to be available on Linux. They re-highlighted the fact that Microsoft SQL launched on Windows and Linux at the same time with the last update. It sounds like that's going to be our future. We're going to see Linux support out of Microsoft from now on. Would you guys agree?
Yeah,
I think so too. And they even, when they released the latest version of Core, they had their partners were VMware, VMware, AWS, and Google. And he said that when they first presented that at their meeting, they were just like, okay.
The other Microsoft execs were like, wait, you're partnering with who? Yeah.
But they
very different company.
understand. And so that's just, they want to have that more open source mentality and just having that unification with the different technologies and being able to work on different platforms and in mixed environments.
Yeah.
I know. I can't wait until they make the capability to run an Active Directory server on Linux, like Active Directory in a container or something. And to my knowledge, they still haven't announced anything on that. Whereas like Microsoft SQL Server, you can run on Linux just in a container or as it's not a native app, it's like an encapsulated app. Right. So eventually I think we'll start to see those compartmentalize and we'll get them. That'll make a big difference. There's just not, I'm a Linux guy, but there's just not a good directory server on Linux. I mean, free IPA maybe, Open LDAP maybe. It's tough. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. Let's move on to our next one. So Cherokee, you threw that one out there. Mike, how about you?
Gosh, most of the sessions I went to were either PowerShell based. In fact, there was one I know, it was what the guy called it. It was pretty clever. Pierre Roman did this session, step away from the mouse, getting started with command line options. And he was looking at different command line tools that we're going to be using nowadays to manage Azure-based resources primarily. He was talking about PowerShell Core again, Azure CLI, our good old standard command prompt, which we still have. And really good session. It was a lot of real world because he's done deployments for years and years and migrations. And he was talking about doing a lot of automation, which is another thing that Jeffrey Snover pointed out in his session. But one of the things that I found was interesting was he focused in on running versus installing. And this is something that I had never thought about before. We're used to like PowerShell Core, for example. When it was in beta, what do? I went to GitHub and I downloaded and I've installed it side by side with Windows PowerShell or PowerShell 5. And you think, okay, well, when they update that, we're going to go and I'll download a new version of it or update it or what have you. And his point was, this is open source software, and we have to think a little bit differently because in the past, we're used to getting updates regularly, but not nightly, right? With open source software, they said that since PowerShell Core has been released, they've had 52 updates, right? And so if you're automating, if you're writing scripts and you're using PowerShell Core and you haven't updated it in a week, you could definitely be using something that's out of date and that does not have all the latest capabilities or something has changed. And so what he was meaning by install versus run, if I install it, I have to go and update that. His idea, and I thought this was clever, something I actually want to try, is he was putting PowerShell core, a Docker image, right? Using a Docker image to host PowerShell core running on, I believe he was running on Windows Nano. And so what he has was a script that every time he launched this script, it would do a pull from Azure, from Git, right? And pull down the latest version of PowerShell core and load it up. If it hadn't changed, great, fire up the container. There's my PowerShell core. If it had changed, download it, and now you're running the latest version. So every time he runs it, he's guaranteed to be running the latest version, which I thought was kind of clever.
Yeah, and that used to be you would just wait for the Windows update to pull it down, or in the case of like PowerShell not being installed, you have to manually install it. So it's neat to see that world. Yep. I think everybody can probably agree that containers are just the way of the future. Mm-hmm. That's something we're all going to deal with. Windows Server 2019, which I imagine one of you will talk about, has a lot of additional container support. So
is there a new server coming out?
Yeah, no. I heard a rumor about that, but
I'll jump in there on that one real quick. That is one thing that I was very happy to see, because there was thoughts. There was I had heard that 2019 would be focused more on Azure and moving away from on-premises. That 2016 was our really last server designed for that hybrid environment. And one of the big things that I got out of this session was that couldn't be further from the truth. That Server 2019 is designed for a hybrid environment, that they have not left the on-premises out. They understand that we're still running servers locally. They want us to move to Azure, but that 2019 is designed very well to handle both sides, to work seamlessly on-premises and out there in Azure. So that was one of the big things I picked up about 2019, is the fact that it's still going to be supported, on-premises.
I kind of was a little upset at first because I was worried about that, and I think someone who really put it eloquently was Erin Chappell, and she's the VP of a project management group that works with the server team, and she likened it to the when virtualization first came out. She said people were worried that they wouldn't be, we wouldn't have the on-premises equipment and so forth. But in fact, that was the opposite, because it increased the demand focused around the technology needs, and it just increased, and had more infrastructure even locally. And I thought that was pretty cool for her to put it in that perspective. And I'm like, yeah. And I mean, it has some really awesome capabilities in Server 2019, and especially with storage, and it just complements Azure so well. And you hear this term lift and shift, and they're trying to get people to move up to the cloud, but I forget the exact statistics. I think like a year ago, it was around maybe 54%, jumping to 81% this year when they polled last, for people who had a migration plan already in place. So that's a huge shift for just 1 year, looking at the numbers there.
Yeah, and we've kind of been seeing these cycles. Like back in 2000, people were going through that with virtualization, saying like, I'm not putting virtualization in production. That would be crazy. And then, a decade later, virtualization is everywhere. And in 2010, it was the cloud. People would say, I'm not putting stuff in AWS, and Azure didn't really exist then. I'm not going to do that. And here we are 8 years later, and everybody's going into the cloud. I'm curious in 2020 what it'll be. Maybe the dummy terminal type clients, the Chromebooks, where you have a laptop that's not a real laptop, something like that. And people will resist it, and in 2028, everybody will have it. So it's neat to see those cycles.
How did you do it any other way? Yeah.
Yeah, Surface Go.
Yeah. 2019 was definitely a big thing there. They talked about, like I said, making sure that they had the on-premises support. The other thing, you heard a lot of the buzzwords, hyper-converged networks. 2019, they were really saying how 2019 takes all of the things that we've been adding on to 2016 over the last few years and puts it out in a long-term service branch type distro, where, hey, this stuff's been tested. We're now putting it into 2019, and it is good to go and stable and solid. But you saw hyper-converged software-defined networking and software-defined storage, both of which are big components of Server 2019, built in or baked into, and is providing Microsoft's solution for software-defined networking and software-defined storage.
And with those technologies in place, you can blend your on-premises solution with your cloud. And I've seen where you can take a virtual machine and seamlessly move it up into Azure and move it back onto on-prem and stuff. It's really cool stuff. Now, Cherokee, you mentioned the Surface Go, or is it Surface Go? Is that right?
That's the newest one. There's a Surface Pro, there's a Surface Go.
Did you get a chance to see the Surface lineup? Did they have that highlighted at Ignite?
I won a Surface Pro. I got one, which was totally awesome. 8 gigs, 256 gig drive. It wasn't like, one of like a little cheapie. It was pretty nice. They didn't cheap out on that.
Already loaded up with stickers and looking good.
Yeah.
I know, it's so fancy.
Mike, what did you win?
I got a little plush toy from SUSE Linux.
Oh, nice!
I got the chameleon. No, but it was a lot of fun. I forget where I was going with that. I was going to tell you, a lot of what you're seeing out there too was this whole Azure stack. And so Cherokee and I, we need to push to where we can try to get down to spend some money. And we can pick up this Azure stack where you can basically run the same technology they're running out there in the cloud on premises, which then goes back to what you were talking about, is moving things back and forth. And you're playing with the same technology. So this is something that I think we're going to see with the hyperconvergence, right? We talked about, or I mentioned that was a big buzz term there, where we look at our racks now and you have storage and you have storage area networks, and then you have the connections of that, and then you got your servers, you've got your switches, your routers, and they take that and they just basically hyperconverge it and use software-defined networking and software-defined storage, and so your rack becomes much smaller, much simpler, and I think you're going to see more of that showing up in server closets.
I think the marriage between the software and the hardware was just like unlike anything I had seen before. They really partnered with, especially Intel, like with their Optane for their memory, and
impressive.
also like Fujitsu drives. They really partnered with these companies to make the best environment for this particular hardware. I mean, of course, you can run other hardware, but just to be able to, in a one-stop shop in the Windows Admin Center. And there were a lot of advancements with that also, but you didn't have to go to multiple places to check on your hardware. It was all there, and I'm sure you'll talk more about the Optane memory because you were pretty excited about that too.
I really was. Don, have you heard of the Optane?
I've seen a little bit about it. They've achieved all new speeds, all new capacity, and all new prices.
Yeah. Luckily, I mean, they didn't go into the prices, obviously.
So it's not out yet for a regular purchase. They said early 2019 because I wanted to see how much that was. I'm like,
If you have to ask, you can't afford it.
That's right.
But for those of you that aren't familiar with it, we're talking about, we've seen over the years, right? As we move things, we want things faster and faster with flash-based RAM. We keep moving it closer and closer to the processor. The shorter the distance, the less latency we have. And we've made it from external, plugging it into USB port to into PCI, its own bus, NVMe, and now we're talking about a stick of RAM that you can actually divide up and use part of it for RAM and part of it as storage or caching for the processor, or you can even dynamically assign the space within there. And they went from and these numbers are just mind-boggling. They almost don't make sense. But last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago at Ignite, they did a test and they made 6 million IOPS using 16 different nodes.
Yep.
I believe it was, in this little test. Obviously, this was a
test environment and highly controlled.
Yes, this wasn't something you're going to build and put in your rack, but 6 million IOPS per second, which is pretty darn impressive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Well, now they've gone to this Optane DC memory. They dropped the nodes from 16 to 12, and they turned in 13 million IOPS per second.
Wow.
With 12 nodes, not 16.
With 12 nodes, so
Yeah.
less nodes, and they doubled, more than doubled their IOPS per second.
So they call that storage class memory. And Optane what is it, DS?
DC, I think,
or
or
DS?
DS? Yeah.
That's the actual manufacturer's name for Intel, which, is really designed to work with the Xeon processors. They work together with that, but it was so impressive.
It really was to watch those numbers tick off, and you're like, it's got to stop around 7. No, maybe 8. It's still going, and it just kept spinning up. They had this program that was spinning up VMs, and they just kept adding more and more and more. And you saw that none of the VMs were choking, none of them worried. They were all green lit, and they were just getting all the access they needed to that storage or
Wow.
to that memory.
I'm thinking in terms of like AWS. When I do a provisioned IOPS instance in AWS, I believe the maximum value is 10,000 IOPS. And
10,000.
you're talking about millions of IOPS. That's really impressive storage
It is.
access.
It is. And that'll trickle down to us eventually and give us some of that performance.
Numbers were just huge on a lot of things, even storage, like with file sync. I want to say per volume up to 100 terabytes of storage. They're really trying to push for that to give you free. They say free, but that's kind of a, what do I have to, but that amount of storage per volume, that's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, Jeff Woolsey did a great demonstration on showing off some of the storage migration and moving. They really want you to move to Azure, right? So they, as you said, they're giving you free storage. But if you're taking your file server and you're migrating it up to Azure, with a few simple clicks within Windows Admin Center, you can start this migration process, and it does everything for you. It monitors what's going on. It moves those files up there. Your users never even know that it has moved. It gives you reports on every single file that was moved, all through one interface, and that's the Windows Admin Center. And that was another big thing that was pushed in just about every session I went to.
Right. So you could have that file sync, storage class memory management access, as well as container access, which I thought was crazy because you could even get event logs for the containers just from the Windows admin interface. And I mean, it's a one-stop shop. Like for GUI tools, it's pretty impressive.
Let's talk about the Windows Admin Center a little bit. That's the former Project Honolulu, right? And now it's Windows Admin Center, which in the beginning wasn't terribly feature rich. And so I liked it. I liked the idea of web-based management of the servers, but I was frustrated that I had to go to different tools. I know, Cherokee, you saw some new advancements there, right?
Yeah, so those were kind of notably some of the bigger things were the file sync, container support, and what was the other thing? Oh, the storage class memory. So those are some, like at least 3 that really stand out because they're really cool, number one. And it's just a really, like Mike said, it almost seems like it's too easy. It's very simple and elegant user interface. Like they really thought it through. I feel like
managing clusters, all of that, all done. Their big slogan was a single pane of glass to manage it all. And it replaces. I'm old school, right? I'm used to all my different MMCs, my Active Directory users and computers, my sites and services, domains and trust, all that stuff. My Hyper-V console, I create MMCs all the time. This is supposed to replace all that, and it really does a good job of making it, as you said, very friendly, easy to navigate, and that was their goal. When you listen to some of the project managers from Project Honolulu or from the Windows Admin Center, that was the idea. We want to make this very intuitive, very easy to use, giving you lots of information, but not so much that you just feel overwhelmed.
Adam Gordon sent me one of the announcements that was talking about Microsoft SQL Server having its management studio integrated inside of Windows Admin Center now, which I think is awesome because the SQL Enterprise Management Studio, like that thing it's huge. It's a pain to install, and so it's nice to have that all web embedded. So it's cool to see that going on. Do we hear any updates on Microsoft Exchange?
I stayed away from Exchange. Sorry,
there's going to be, Exchange Server 2019 running on Core for 19. That was my notes here right beforehand. I was trying to write down some of the notable things, and I don't really play in Exchange Server too much, but I thought that was pretty cool that that's the de facto deployment now is to go ahead and run it on Core.
And when you say core, you're talking about a core services install of Windows Server, right? Not like PowerShell core, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we're seeing that with most of the products now. Windows Server 2019, I think you have to do a core install now, right? Is there a GUI install for it?
They've added just recently because it's generally available now, 2019 as of October here, generally available to the public. But they did add back a GUI install option. Haven't seen it because when I downloaded the preview not too long ago, it still was core only. Before I was reading what I was hearing out there at the conference, they are going to add the GUI install option back because enough people wanted it.
The last release candidate that I worked with, which admittedly was over a month ago, it did a core services install, and then you could enable the desktop experience, which you'd use for a terminal server. So it gave you a GUI, but it had desktop-y stuff on there, which you wouldn't normally want. So that middle ground of having a server GUI was missing.
And I think they're kind of falling right in between that. Like it's not going to be a full-blown GUI, but it is going to give you enough to where like not everything that you would expect with that desktop experience is going to be there, but you are still going to have a GUI to administer it. And then, get away from 2019 for a second, so I know how we're doing here on time. The other big thing was I think, Cherokee, I think you mentioned the term lift and shift. And I know Ronnie recently did a webinar, I think, on desktop as a service. And if you left the server part and you went over towards the client side, this was everywhere. Modern desktops, Microsoft 365, and we're really getting close to the point where you don't deploy the way we do anymore. Yeah. If you bought your user a new laptop, right, it's going to come with maybe Windows 10 installed on it. They're going to log in for the first time right from the OOBE, from the out-of-box experience. They're going to log in with their work account. It's going to reach out to your Azure, and it's going to grab all of your Intune and whatever else you're using to do your mobile device management and configure that device with everything it needs. It's
a lot of
changing.
and it's kind of that weird, the traditional or classic deployment or environment is, and then the modern environment with things like autopilot and Intune, different types of MDM there. So they have to kind of support both of those, and then just kind of getting ready for people to transition into the modern tech world.
Yeah.
Will that handle application deployment as well? I like settings and options; those are easy.
Somewhat. Intune, at least from what I've seen so far, doesn't handle all of your applications. A lot of the Microsoft stuff. But again, it's hard for me to think about it this way. But we don't use traditional desktop apps anymore either, right? I'm not installing Photoshop. I'm getting an app from the Microsoft Store. So I can absolutely do that with Intune.
And I guess if it's phoning home and connecting to your Azure environment, right, and connecting your Azure directory, then it would just be one more step to get it connected up to like a System Center configuration manager, and then you could push apps that way.
Yes, if you had old school apps. But really what they're telling you to do is use MDM, set up your own Microsoft Store for Business, all of your apps that you're going to be putting out. I know, right?
I did too. You just reminded me, like,
that's where we're supposed to have our applications so that users can browse up there and pick the ones we've chosen, or we push them out to them. So it's really a big change in the way we're going to be deploying the client side and managing it. And a lot of tools like I don't know if they call it the Intune migration or the group policy migration tool. I forget the name of this, but they've got tools now to analyze your group policies and see, are there comparable settings in MDM, in Intune.
So just making that shift there.
And the team was really cool when they talk about it. They're like, the way they broke it down is they get a lot of the analytics
Security
back
policies?
if you opt in. And they've looked at the most common settings that people need. And they've taken into account what they're hearing, complaints about what's not there. And those are the ones they focused on first. Because there are some settings, that...
And they also encouraged people to really evaluate those missing policies to see if they're even really needed, because they may have outlived their use in certain cases.
Absolutely. And especially when we think about these are probably not domain joined devices anymore, right? We're getting away from that. These are home users' laptops, Android devices, Apple devices, Windows tablets, Surfaces, things like that.
That is a huge change in thought. That it used to be that all of your machines were company issued and they were domain joined and administrators had full access, and now we're entering this world where you don't even necessarily know what kind of computer somebody has, and you're pushing resources out. And Microsoft's support of Mac OS and Windows, you can deploy Office and manage those systems. It's a big deal. Like it's a really neat time.
I even heard someone say, I think it was Jeffrey Snover, that we are entering into the fourth industrial revolution. What do you think, Don? Do you think that that's kind of a stretch?
I would say that's a bit of a stretch. Well, I mean, some people talk about the computer revolution versus the industrial revolution, because I don't feel like what I do is industrial, because I always think of smokestacks and conveyor belts and all that.
Wiping soot off your face every night.
But, we have been leaping forward in technology year over year. I kind of feel like we're almost going backwards, though. If you think about, we had the mainframe days and dummy terminals, and with the cloud has become our new mainframe, and these low-cost laptops and thin clients and stuff are becoming our dummy terminals again. We're almost back full circle. It just looks a lot prettier, right?
Yeah, your mainframe has moved out to the cloud now. But your dumb terminal is not dumb. You're able to do your own personal stuff on it, and we can segregate personal and work information on that same device and manage it for you.
Yeah, and web-based application. I'm not trying to talk bad about this. I love web-based applications. I don't have stuff I have to maintain. If something goes wrong and I have to format my laptop, that used to be pain. It used to be 3 days of work to get it reconfigured exactly the way I want. Now it's install the web browser I like, and I'm done. Right, everything else is back and in business. So that's always cool to see. Was there anything on the Office 365 front, or was this mostly just focused on Azure?
I haven't got that far.
Okay. You're still digging through the sessions you didn't get to attend?
Yeah, those were some that I didn't want to wait.
They were towards the bottom of the list, so.
But there was definitely some stuff out there.
There's a lot, yeah.
And again, it kind of goes back to what you were saying about how it's not just Windows anymore. We can install Office on other platforms, which is kind of crazy. One of the things that Jeff Snover had said was this is not your father's Microsoft, I think, or made some comment like that. And it was kind of funny when he said it, but it's true. It's not it's not the same organization from top to bottom. I think they embrace open source and they embrace other platforms, and that's just a completely different from the way it was when I haven't been doing this that long, since 2004, and it's completely different from when I started. It really has changed.
It has changed a lot, and I think a lot of that goes down to Satya Nadella and how he has a developer mind, and he's much more appreciative of open source initiatives and trying to coexist with a lot of this stuff. That stat of 51% of servers in Azure being Linux is amazing to me, and I'm still surprised at this very moment. I really did think Microsoft was going to announce Microsoft Linux, right? Because they already do have their own little version of Linux they're using for some of their products internally. I think it's just a matter of time before they do it. There's Amazon Linux, right? It makes sense that in Azure,
not far-fetched at all.
In Azure, they've chosen to partner up with Canonical for Ubuntu and Red Hat for Red Hat Enterprise Linux. But it just makes sense. They have so many developers, such a talented team that there's got to be a Microsoft Linux before too long.
And in fact, that reminds me of another session I went to that was talking about the Windows subsystem for Linux. And how easy it is now. I can go to the Microsoft Store and I can download the Ubuntu app or the Kali app, and I can run this operating system on my machine. Side by side, I can have 3 different Linux shells open, running from 3 different platforms right along with my Windows.
And for the pen testers that are out there, I know a lot of the pen testers that I have spoken to, the actual field pen testers, run Windows. And I've asked about that. I said, Kali Linux is so popular and all these tools are written for Linux. Why do you run Windows? And it's because a lot of them love the PowerShell. They use the PowerShell to write all sorts of scripts and do things. Well, now you've kind of got these 2 choices. You can run PowerShell on Linux, and so now you get the best of both worlds, or you can run Linux on top of Windows. And the Windows subsystem for Linux is really slick. It launched with just Ubuntu, but since then, you can now do SUSE Linux in the subsystem, and there's a couple others.
I think there's at least 5 in the store right now, and the team was talking about partnering up with additional ones. Maybe somebody in the audience asked about CentOS.
I think they brought up a really good point about for Windows-based admins that are already familiar with PowerShell being able to administer those Nix-based systems. It's doubling the value of that admin. So, that's, a lot of people, especially people who are studying and students, they kind of, it's almost impossible, I would say, in these days, but you still have those people who are trying to resist the change. But even just that one little statement should put things into perspective for you.
All right. Well, it sounds like you guys got to see a whole heck of a lot. I know you're still sifting through stuff, so maybe we'll do a follow-up episode later on with any other new announcements that we have. We'll certainly have more coverages, more about Windows Server 2019 comes out. It is available for download. You can go and pull it right now. The newest release of Windows 10 with the update, it's also available for download. Is it the 1809?
1809, and we get a dark theme finally added to Windows Explorer. That was the one I've been waiting for.
Apple did this too.
Mike.
How hard is it to make a dark theme? But they're all advertising it like it's the second coming.
Windows has had a dark theme for a while, but there were certain apps for some reason, they just didn't do or couldn't do. I don't know.
Well, good to know.
Yeah.
Now that that's solved, we can move on to hearing cancer.
I can live my life now.
All right. Well, I'm glad you both had a lot of fun out there at the conference. They have announced Microsoft Ignite 2019, which is also going to be an Orlando, Florida, ITProTV will definitely be there. You two will most likely be there.
Yeah.
So definitely be sure to check that out. And, just keep an eye on ITProTV as more announcements start to come out from us, and we try and filter and decipher all the data because it is a huge amount of information.
It really is.
All right. Well, thank you both for being our field reporters, and
You're
thanks for
welcome.
appearing here on the podcast. I appreciate it. I know the viewers do as well.
Very welcome.
All right. Well, for everybody out there in TV land, that's it for this episode. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to tune in next week for more Technado right here. Same bat time, same bat channel. Now I'm going to have to license that phrase. Whatever. But thank you all for watching. This has been Technado. I'm Don Pizzette. We'll see you next time.
Are you enjoying Technado? Then be sure to check out our other podcast, Ask Me Anything, where our subject matter experts answer your questions. Here's the latest episode, and here's the full playlist. And as always, be sure to subscribe to ITProTV's channel.
ITProTV.